Alrighty. Taylor, I'm so excited to have you on the show. And we got connected through our mutual friends, Ellie and Britley, and we're both in the online coaching world and coming to Jesus. And probably neither of us would have thought, like, last year at this time that we'd be doing conversations like this. And that's what makes them so incredible and so special. And so I can't wait to give you the floor today and like for me to get to know you and to get to know your story and your walk with God and to support a lot of other people who are curious about what this New Age to Jesus conversation is about or going through their own come to God, come to Jesus moments. And before we get into your testimony, I just want to give you a minute or two to share about what do you do as an entrepreneur? What's your background? Um, so that people have some context for your story.
Yeah. I am the founder and steward of Untamed University. So it is a faith-based university for female visionaries, industry disruptors, coaches, mentors, to really step into their God-given assignment and to create thriving businesses with structure and that the feminine kind of just the inner guidance, the spirit, Holy Spirit guidance is my jam, blending those two. And I have been an entrepreneur in the online space for, oh my goodness, like a decade, over a decade. I have been in this space for over a decade. Started off with fitness and nutrition. That evolved into all different various of teachings over the past 10 years. I'm also the host of a podcast as well, The Embodied Woman. And I run an all women's event in Costa Rica. And so, yeah, that's what I do. I help women really come to life in their God-given assignment.
So good. All
Yeah,
right. Well,
yeah,
you're in the right place, and I'm sure people are going to love listening to, your walk and what that's looked like. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear your testimony.
yeah. My kind of journey has been unfolding, for me, my shift is really from like new thought to Christianity. So I want to like anchor in for me the new thought means because I'm going to be sprinkling in throughout my testimony. It's a huge piece of it. New thought, if anyone's new to the term new thought, is our thoughts create our reality. We are like a God, not God, but our ability to create our own reality through positive thinking. Um, you have to micromanage your vibration and your frequency. And so that's the world that I'm coming out of, where um, yeah, I thought that I could just like manipulate my world to be what I wanted to be and not have any negative thoughts because that would ruin all of my hard work. So that's where I'm coming out of. And for me growing up, I grew up Lutheran. So I grew up in a household that we went to church on Sundays. Definitely didn't have like crosses in the house. We didn't read the Bible. I don't think there was even a Bible in my home. We were very much, you go to church on Sunday, you go there on the holidays, and that's it. And so I really didn't grasp the understanding of who Jesus was as a child. I remember learning about the Noah's Ark and all the stories, right? But I never really understood what he did and why he did it. I'm sure I was taught it, but it never landed for me. Um, I've got great memories like at church, even with my grandparents, spent like most of my summers with my grandparents. They were very Lutheran, very heavily involved in their church. And so, yeah, I grew up with like loving the church and loving community. And then it was in probably like high school, I started getting involved with like crowds, we're doing cocaine and just not definitely God was not at the center of my life. Struggle with people pleasing and all the things that just kept me going inwards, inwards, inwards. And I didn't have the proper Christian mentorship because we weren't heavily involved um to 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 guide me otherwise. Actually, that was in middle school because then my dad, during all of this, my dad ended up becoming a pastor. So plot twist, my dad, who was like I don't know, president of a software computer company out of nowhere. We were living in Colorado, sits us down at dinner, again, not a super religious family, and said that God has called him to be pastor. And I remember my first reaction was, I think I even said it out loud. It's like, I was like, but we don't really ever like go to the church a lot. Like it's so I was genuinely confused, like just a naive kid. So I'm kind of backtracking a little bit. Um, just a naive kid. I was genuinely confused. We had built our forever home, our dream home in Colorado. It took years to build. And out of nowhere, my dad's just like, I'm called. That's the first time I heard the word calling. So I'm pinning that in for a second. And so we ended up uprooting our entire family to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, across the country. So I was in my happy place in Colorado, moved to Gettysburg for my dad to go to seminary, and he became a pastor. And then we got like stationed in Maryland to build a church. And before I know it, uh, like his entire life is becoming the church. He really grows a church from meeting in a middle school cafeteria to a big church, a big Lutheran church. Lutheran churches aren't like mega churches, a bigger Lutheran church. And I'm witnessing during this time, um, yeah, just my dad's not who he used to be. There wasn't much family time. He was on call 24/7, which a lot of people don't realize pastors are pretty much on call 24/7. Um, and so that was his life, his priority. And we weren't his priority very much anymore. And I was starting to notice also too, like he was always on edge and just my relationship dynamics with him were changing. Fast forward now, um, college, I'm starting to do, more drugs, alcohol, sex, all the things. Again, I look back, it's because I was so confused on what was happening to my life and my family and my dad, like just not having a proper masculine guide at all. And so I leaned into like, dysfunctional relationships. And then, yeah, senior year of college, I had my dad's iPod and I was borrowing his truck, like throwback when we had iPods. I'm gonna date myself for a second. I had opened it to play like a song, and somehow it got on like the Wi-Fi or something, and it's like with the newer iPods and emails, a couple like emails, like OG emails came up, and they were from another woman, and they were not like cute parishioner emails. um Thank the Lord, he's kind of renewed those out of my brain, but they were intense. There was lots of emails with my dad and a woman, and you can tell that they've known each other for a long time. I approached my dad about it, and he got immediately defensive and said, I'll take care of it, I'm going to end it, because it was an affair. Like, it was clearly that it was an affair. They were sexual emails. So I believed him. 3 months later, after this, my nephew tragically dies. I move in with my sister to take care of her and be with her. I then end up numbing out on alcohol. That kind of puts a tear in my family. My dad totally disassociates because he can't handle what just happened. So now it's starting to really, like, things are starting to build like in my family. Um, and then come to find out a few months later that my dad did not end that relationship, and through many, many things, which is a whole different conversation, he was having multiple affairs with multiple parishioners. And also, the emails that I found were from a 20-year relationship he was holding. My parents were married for 25, so you can do the math. Yeah, so he was, during marriage counseling, like having affairs with these wounded women. um Immediately, like, my family just fell apart. My mom was like, absolutely not. He got dethroned from the Lutheran church, ended up having another affair with another pastor. They're now, they got married, all the things. So I give these details because this man who was my father, who I looked up to, I respected growing up, God called him. And then to watch where God called him and then the destruction that happened in many families, not just mine. The moment that all that blew up in my family, um, is where I remember it so clearly. I was like, if God was real, he would not choose pastors like this, and he would not let this happen to people's family. And so for that moment, I'm an atheist, and I just was anti-God. My first marriage, plot twist, God, the name God was not allowed to be said at my wedding. Like, like my oldest brother married me, who was Catholic. And I said, don't you even try to slide it in there. Like, I want no part of God in this marriage. Because I was just that mad. And I will go down that path of just anti-God, atheist, all the things. And then discover the book as I'm like in a deep, deep, like, my life is just internally a mess. Externally, it looked great. My marriage was just not, I was not married to the right person. I was numbing out. I was eating like just numbing out on food, just constantly hungry for something, right? We know where this is going, just filling myself with anything to feel something. And that's where I discovered the movie The Secret. I'm sure we've all watched the movie or read the book The Secret. And I was at my lowest. I think I just eaten like a pint of Ben and Jerry's, bottle of wine. I was also in anger management before this and Overeaters Anonymous. So I was low. I was low, 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 low. As the enemy loves when that happens. So I'm watching The Secret. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for. Like I can finally get to a place where I'm not feeling heavy and angry, and I can create a better reality. And so that it goes into the power of now, and into all these different new thought books, and I just become consumed with it. And it just that's the way I lived. And fast forward, I kind of start dabbling with God again through psychedelics, and just like that sort of direction. And then two and a half, well, it'd be 3 years this spring, is where 2.5, 3 years ago, is where Jesus finally found me and said, okay, enough is enough. Like you've been playing this world for a decade, and it's time to finally stop. And this is where I was saved. I used to judge Christians when they were like, oh yeah, I'm saved. I'm like, that's not a thing. Like my like high horse pride rock, absolutely used to judge women, especially like during virtue comes to mind, that are saved. I'm like, that's not real. They're closed-minded. And then it happened to me. I'm like, oh, it's real. Hi. Like Saul the Paul. I was Saul persecuting Christians, judging them, and then it happened. So I was at a gathering in Costa Rica. It was behind sign pre-planned. They ended up putting me through. I was like their victim, their chosen one. There's about 20 of them. They're like peers of mine, just kind of like people down there. End up putting me into a trance and doing a psychological like ritual on me that was like 5 hours long. And I remember taking a sip at the very beginning of my margarita, or like DJ, there was like a DJ, all the things. And for the first time in 15 years, I hadn't been to church in 15 years. Um, I hear God's voice for the first time in 15 years after edging him out. I hear him say, sit down, you're going to be okay. I'm thinking, what do you like? What? Okay. And so I just did. There was this peace that took over me. I sat down, and that's where they started doing their weird ritualistic stuff. End up being a very like light community. Um, Ended up they were smoking meth, and it was dark, 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 dark. And so the entire time, where they were doing the psychological like thing on me, I wasn't scared. And they like absolutely did inappropriate physical things as well. Nothing like that's like extreme, extreme. But to say that I never felt scared. And this is a scenario that could have gone drastically wrong if I freaked out and fought back. And I knew that I was 1000% protected by God at that point. And so it took about a year and a half after that to heal from the trauma from that. Thank goodness I have people in my life that are trauma, like they're like psychotherapists, to help me actually heal from the psychological trauma of being, in a ritual, a part of a ritual as the victim. Um, and then it was this December of 2023 where my husband and I were working out, and the conviction was so loud. God was like, you got to go back to church, and it's going to be for Christmas Eve service, because I have beautiful memories of Christmas Eve service. And I told my husband, and my husband's like, you want to go to church? Like, oh, this is serious. I'm like, yeah, like I feel like we have to. Like, I'm not really being given a choice anymore, because I wanted to go the year before and it didn't work out. And so this time God was like, we're going. You're going to church this Christmas. And we go, and we walk into the church, and they're like beautiful things of how the church fell into our lap with ease. And I walk in, ceremony starts, and I'm just crying. I'm angry. I've got all the feelings, right? Angry at my dad, angry at God, forgiving my dad, forgiving God, gratitude to my dad, like all the things during the service. And it was, yeah, like that was where I really felt like the Holy Spirit for the first time, probably my entire life. And since then, It's been pretty much a year now. Like I'm like that like church girl. We haven't missed a single Sunday when we're in town. I'm heavily involved in the church and small groups and all the things. And I've transitioned my business, which you can talk about that later. Um, but yeah, like it was a moment of I could have died and he didn't let me. And so therefore it is my commitment to follow Christ in a way that I know he wants me to, and to be able to just be that daughter of Christ. And so I am now officially the Jesus freak after crucifying Jesus freaks.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And oh, there's so many directions I want to go in. I think the first thing that comes to mind actually is, so many people, I think, go into the new age or into new thought. I love that you bring that terminology in so that people can, hear a bit of the difference. And there's a big overlap too. But they go into those worlds because they've had church hurt, because they've had aversion to Christianity in some way. And then, I fell into the yoga religion because I didn't have, because I left the Catholic background. And I hear this often from people. It's like a psychological barrier for them now being able to embrace Jesus or to go back to church. And I'm just wondering, I bet you've encountered this with the women that you're working with now, and it is a big part of your story. So what would you say to someone who's listening to this who's like, Taylor, I get it. Like I went through something similar. Like, I found I had just a really rough background with the church, or this thing happened, and it's so terrible when those things happen. How would you encourage them? With regards to, and how did you like psychologically kind of come to terms with your own church hurt or church back, if you would use that term?
Yeah, for sure. I like all the church hurt for sure. And distrust in the masculine. I turned my dad, we could talk about later. Like I turned my dad into God. Like I turned what my dad did. Like it was, I didn't know any different. When most women do that with dad hurt, they turn it into God hurt if they don't know the difference. And so I love this question because it's one of my favorite questions to answer right now, because I've got such a good visual for people that everyone's going to relate to this. Like regardless whatever you believe in, you'll relate to it. Um like everyone listening, like raise your hand if you've had food poisoning or you've gotten some type of stomach bug from food and you ate bad food, right? You're just like, whether it was food poisoning, you're like that just didn't settle right. Well, my question for you, did you stop eating ever? Like, did you just stop going back to food? Like, because you got sick, did you just give up food for the rest of your life? No, it's no different than church hurt. Just because we get hurt at church doesn't mean all churches create hurt or all Christians create hurt. It was just something you ate, something you received that was bad, but it doesn't make food bad. It doesn't make the church bad.
I love that response. There's a similar analogy that I like, is like if you heard an amateur pianist playing Beethoven badly, you wouldn't be like, oh, babe, never listening to Beethoven again. Beethoven is terrible. It's like, no, we know Beethoven is incredible. It's the pianist who's not playing it very well. And we're able to distinguish those things when it comes to food or music, but it can get, confusing when it comes to God, and understandably so. But I love how you responded to that. And let's share more about the business transformation, because so many people I know it's just been, and it still is, like every day God's like, oh, this, have we seen this? This has to change, or this was built on an interesting
Yep.
foundation. It's got to go. And, people on this show, we've had everything from people who have absolutely wiped their businesses off the face of the earth, like down to the LLC, to people who are like, oh, I actually just need to straighten some paintings or remove some things and like renovate a bit. And I think all approaches are so valid. So I'm curious
Yeah.
to hear more about what God changed in your work.
Yeah. So Untamed is a container that I've had for about 3 years now. It's like a 1 year container that was around like sensuality and wealth and the community of women in it that just God placed in there before I even like, came back to him. Just incredible. And so I'm so grateful. I planted the seed of like, I am so grateful that God, he like set me up for success to do what I was going to do in present time where it didn't have to be burn everything down. As a gracious God does sometimes, he throws us the bone and is like, you're going to use this later. And so when God put it on my heart in the spring of 2024 to transition, Untamed was ready to go through its own next evolution anyways. It was just the women were ready to grow to their next level. I was attracting lots of like driven entrepreneurs and yada yada. And so yeah, he was just like, Untamed is going to turn into a university, an online university. I'm like, what do you mean an online university? He's like, I'll give you the how, I'll provide like the steps. Like just like it was that kind of conviction where you have no other choice. Like you must be obedient to this. And so I hadn't really come out super like I'm always a pretty like authentic of like every iteration of who I be person. Obviously keeping my personal life personal as much as I possibly can. And so I hadn't really come out with people knew I was going back to church, but it wasn't I love Christ, I love Jesus, like a coming out. But it's on brand for me just to go all in. I don't really toe dip. And so thank you, God, for making me that way. Um, so I made the announcement to the women in Untamed, and they were super excited. And then we made the announcement publicly that Untamed would be a university, and for it's faith-based, faith-driven. No matter what the religion is, relationship to Christ doesn't matter. Like women who are just rooted in faith was where God wanted me to place the university, and not just like one direction. I'll get to that in a moment. And so we made that transition, and it was just like God provided everything, the how, all like it just unfolded so effortlessly. It was such a natural unfolding, even from people who didn't expect it, but they're like, this makes sense for you. Like this actually makes sense for you. And so that was really fun to get just such incredible feedback. And then yeah, like the part that I'm excited to this like to keep leaning into and speaking on is for me the conviction to make sure that everything I was teaching um aligned with what he wanted me to teach in the present moment. So that meant that it was probably also same thing spring. I shut down probably 80% of my business. And didn't like change the URLs or anything. It was just I'm not offering this anymore. It's just not on the website. Which means 80% of income I said, all right, God, I trust you, and shut it all down and poured all of our attention into the Untamed experience, our membership that God also placed in my heart to start, in the university. That's it. Everything else, he was like, trust me, like just you're complete with that. So I don't refer to it as burning down. It was just like he's like, you're complete with that. It's time to move on to the next iteration of you. And so just doing that was probably the most terrifying, uncomfortable, like, bro, you sure you got my back? Like, because this is a big deal. And were there days where I absolutely doubted him? Yes, God, I believe you, help me with my unbelief. Every day. Like, God, I believe in you, help me with my unbelief. The beautiful story of the father and the son who had the demon. And so did that, still in it, still like trusting God, still keeping out 80% of what I took out. And it's been a wild ride but I've never felt more fulfilled, more at peace, more excited, more in purpose, more on purpose than ever before.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I would love to deep dive into some semantics here, and you kind of alluded to this, but it's been something I think I'm picking up on something that's going on for you. I'll let you elaborate too. But what I've seen is in the grand scheme of New Age to Jesus business owners who are going through transformations, it seems like there's kind of one of two directions that people go in is like one people because I think we're all just like I'm like you. There's no toe dipping. It's just we're all in. We're just these zealous like that's how we get into being entrepreneurs and being successful and in the new age too and just being like very into everything that we're into. So I think there is that zealousness where I've seen a lot of people just completely turn their business into, well, now it's going to be a Christian based business and I'm going to only work with Christians and I'm going to talk about Jesus and it's like full-time ministry in the face of a business. And I think that's so great for the people who are called to that and there's like so much of that that's needed. And then I think there's those of us that have businesses where it's like we feel called to speak about Jesus or share about our faith, but from a place of more like, hey, whoever still wants to be in this space and who feels called, it doesn't really matter what you believe. I'm not going to turn you away if you're not like, if you don't know God as Father the way I do right now, or you're not about this or that. And that's the direction like lately I've really sat with Jesus so many times. I'm like, do you want me to stop working with new age clients? Do you want me to not work with certain people? Do you only want me to work with people because, as business coaches, we're helping to build up and prosper someone through their marketing and their sales. And I was a wreck for a while, being like, well, then am I supporting these things out in the world that have deceived people and have deceived me? And I was just, but every time the answer came back with so much peace, where Jesus is like, no, speak about me and share your story, but let them come and let them come into your space and support them because they can encounter me through you living Christ. And let's be realistic. If I were to say, no, I'm not going to support so and so because you're doing astrology or whatever, they're going to go get another business coach who doesn't know Jesus to help them with that. And it's better. And this is what I've felt, that people get to know that they get to stay in this world and get to have the deeper conversations and have some seeds planted. And I know people feel so many different ways about all of this, but I noticed that you talked about faith and not necessarily it being exclusively Christian. So I'd love to hear more about like what God put on your heart as far as that goes and the types of people that you do feel are you're aligned to work with.
Yeah. Uh, so I'll start with, remember how I was saying with Untamed, God set me up for success for the future for this. One of our sayings, we've got a few different sayings in Untamed, but one of them that's been there since day one is Untamed is a community and a container where all of who you be is welcomed, where all of who you be is welcomed. And so that rings true more today than it ever has before, in the brand of Untamed. And so, yeah, I am so grateful that in this season God has me speaking to whoever feels called to be in the university. I am grateful to that I understand both sides like so fully, and I celebrate both sides. I love the human journey where when we've been on both sides, it's like that makes sense. I get that for you. And it's like this compassion, right? That which is Jesus. Like the book Lead Like Jesus is one of my favorite books. Jesus didn't leave people out because of their beliefs. No, he just kept leading by example and let people go through their own path. And so for me, I stand behind where all of who you be is welcomed. And that's something that was also really important to me. I would see, and I say this from a place of observation and zero judgment at all. When people make the jump from New Thought, New Age to Christianity in that path of just full jump, I witnessed people when I was in like heavy New Thought almost like looking back at their past community and selves with judgment of this is where I'm at now. I'm better than you kind of energy. And that was such a pivotal moment. I don't even know who it was that did it, but it was enough where that planted a seed where I don't ever want to be that person that when I go through a pivot, I'm like, sorry guys, bye. Like I get people can do that in a graceful way, but I witness people do it in a not graceful way. And so I know it's really important, yeah, to just be a bridge for people, like wherever they're at, whatever bridge they're on, and keep it focused on what I can do to support them. And so that's my answer.
That's a beautiful answer. Yeah, I think the kind of realizing it's almost sometimes like a vestige maybe of the new age or new thought of thinking like, okay, now I know Jesus and now I have to go out and like do all these things and like make sure everybody knows and they come along with me and we can share our testimony and we can be stands for it. And yes, God ultimately opened our hearts. He opened your heart in that ritual and got through to you. And it's like, though if he can get through to us, he's got it and he will open, we can plant seeds and maybe like create a little, openings and, stimulate some thought or some openness for people. But ultimately, yes, he's going to be the one who calls them home and we can be resource. That's why I love this show because it's like a resource. It's separate from my main platform. If people want to come seek out these conversations, they are available. People want me to pray over them or ask questions, I'm here for it. But if not, then that's where they're at with God. And just on a quick note, when you did start to speak more about Jesus and Christ specifically, because this has a very different charge, or it's going to be more polarizing than just talking about God. I'm just curious of your experience in your audience of how that was received. Did you see people unfollow? Did you have people go, "Oh my God, this is amazing, something of everything"?
Um, yeah, it's funny that to this day, I still, when I share about Jesus or something, there's still like that, don't do it, don't do it. Like they're not gonna like you, right? The people pleasing comes up. And so I just like want to always be vulnerable of that. Like it's still uh, a stretchy thing for me, not a fearful thing, but just like it's a stretchy thing out of my comfort zone. And right, I love the Saul of Paul story because he's bold. Like he didn't give any. And neither did Jesus. That's why he's so offensive. Like the Bible is offensive. Jesus was offensive. Like he made that very clear. That what his teachings are and who he be is meant to be offensive. So that being said, I've always kind of been like a passionate person, and so the feedback I got wasn't like I didn't get anything bad. There wasn't any, wow, it was more, this makes sense. Like which is wild because I was atheist and a lot of my people know my story about my dad. But I've built such trust and authenticity with my audience because of how I've just been authentic for 10 years that it wasn't this, I don't know about this. It was, wow, this is a big leap. Something must have happened to have Taylor make such a big jump after publicly being anti-Christian. So great feedback. Um, feedback too of just like love that for you, but like I love this for me, which is like I love it. Like, so that's been like that. For sure, lots of unfollows for like hundreds and hundreds of like every time I talked about Jesus, or did like our little Sunday morning, like my husband and I share like our outfits for church. I live in Charleston, so like people get like we get dressed up here in Charleston, which that's my jam is outfits and being able to express myself through clothing. And so anytime I was starting to see church, my followers would drop by hundreds. And then at some point, I'm sure if I looked at it, probably since sharing, that I follow Christ, probably thousands of people unfollowed over the time. But that gets replaced with people who are like, who circle back. I think the really cool thing that's happened is the circle back has been real. Like we have a free community. It's just faith based. It's on school, and you have to submit like a few questions when you join. And there are clients of mine who are like fitness clients, who are like new thought clients, who came to Christ before me and now are like, I love this for you, like, and us, I'm back. So that's been really cool to see old clients come back through now, and they get it. They get it because when you're born again, unless you're born again, like you just like I mean, real. Unless you're born again, you don't get it. Like unless you're born again, like if you're not born again, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. But this is who you were. This is what you like ate and breathed. How can you do this? And it's like, that is the point. Like you die. Like you literally die. And again, this is the stuff that I would make fun of and be like, that's dumb. That's not real. They're just like trying to make excuses to like live a new life. And it's like, that's where, in the end, I'm not here to please people or man. I'm here to please God and
Mhm.
whatever. I'm sure also I've got I would venture to say people, because of my dad's background, maybe confused on this path I've stepped on. But again, like I'm just being obedient, and that's my only job.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think it's so important to underscore that for people listening who are, maybe one of our listeners hears you're on the fence about speaking about Jesus or sharing more about your faith or using God instead of universe or using Jesus instead of God or whatever terminology is starting to become like, oh, I want to be obedient and I want to share and I want to be more public about this, to actually like almost every guest on the show who I've asked that question of, like, we all say kind of the same thing where, yes, some people are going to fall away, but the vast majority of their response is like loving and supportive, even if they don't understand it or they don't agree or have the same beliefs. They're like, great. Okay. Let's they're just like digesting that new part of your identity and moving right on to the next thing with you. And then yes, so many new people that get to come in or people who come back. So really, if that, just assuages any fear for anyone, just know it's probably going to be, it's kind of like any messaging upgrade that, I talk a lot about messaging in my business, but almost all of it is going to be better received than you can even imagine.
1000%. It really is like it's the enemy. My microphone got changed. There we go. Uh, my belief and my, just my perspective of any time like that doubt comes up, like, oh, should I? Right? That's the enemy. God doesn't. That's not this like the fruit of the spirit. And so anyone that it wants to lean in, and share, remember that like God wants you to, and ultimately God's in charge. And so how I do it is when I hear the enemy or the doubt come in, I, ask myself like what God am I making an idol? Am I making like our big G God, like the all, or am I making fear of man an idol? Am I making Instagram an idol? Am I making the lives of the enemy an idol? One path leads to
Mhm.
destruction, one path leads to life.
Yeah.
That's just how I look at it.
Yeah. There's also a really good book I'm reading right now by Zig Ziglar, and it's called God's Way is Still the Best Way. And it's
Mm.
just all these beautiful stories of entrepreneurs who have managed to weave in biblical principles and their Christian faith and to preach the gospel in many different ways, some very overtly and some more subtly. And it's great inspiration for here's all these different ways that you can glorify God in the work that you do without it needing to look one specific way. And that they all are extremely successful because they were obedient with whatever it was that God said, hey, for your business, this is how I want you to glorify me and bring this in. Just to wrap this up, I would love you to share a little bit about what are some of the things, kind of talking about the new thought world. What were some of the ways that you started to realize, like, oh, this is like a false light and this is kind of dark? Because I get these questions sometimes from people who are like, what's so bad about manifesting? What's so bad about, there's energy and there's, the quantum and where are these things in opposition to each other? Where did you realize, like, hey, this actually is not the way?
Yeah, I mean it's deception really. New like what that all is deception. And deception started like, what Genesis 3 or whatever, Genesis 3. So I'll start with that of, right, I liken new thought to that scene where, the serpent, Satan comes up and it's like, you sure he said not that tree? Like, you sure he said that? He took truth. He didn't say God didn't speak to her and say not to eat the fruit, but he perverted it just enough, like just enough, where it was like, oh, you're right. It actually does feel good to have my eyes opened, and shouldn't kill me. I mean, he didn't say I would like keel over and die verbatim. He just said don't eat it. Like, um, and that's new thought. Like that's new thought. And so for me, how that started unfolding actually was like a water faucet, um, as God does in the past year of my evolution, sanctification process. So God speaks to me through, which is like the best. And my husband's like, this is the wildest thing to watch. He guides me through YouTube videos, like podcasts on YouTube. Um, and he'll tell me what to look up, um, and then kind of what rabbit hole to follow. So my husband was out of town one week. God does this whenever my husband's out of town. He's like, let's go. Like, it's like the wildest thing that happens. So my husband comes home. He's like, so where are you at now? I'm like, I've lost my mind, but in the best way. And so I was going down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos. I think it started with, oh, I forget her name. Her channel's so good. But she's talking about like Oprah, like kind of had like a thing of like Oprah and Eckhart Tolle and a bunch of people. I've never loved Oprah. That's a whole different conversation. But like Eckhart Tolle and people like that, and it was like using biblical, like the key, like the tagline was like using biblical for evil. I'm like, what? Right? Clickbait. And so watching this, and all of a sudden, I liken it to like psychedelic experiences where all of a sudden the walls just start to drop and the veil gets thinner and thinner. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've been believing all of this. And this host broke it down so beautifully of like, this is true, but this is how they pervert it. This is true, but this is how they pervert it. And I'm a proof person. And so like a conceptual person, I like to have like a this, not that. And so I just kept going on the rabbit hole. And then what really got me was being guided. I never even knew that this was like a thing besides Doreen Virtue. Um, Tangibly, like verbatim, New Age to Christianity. And so I watched that like a testimonial video and I'm watching it. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like those, I'm just walking around the house, like watching these. I can't get, I'm up at like 4 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And of course, the spiritual warfare during that when my husband wasn't home, I got a lot of fire. So I'm like, try me, Satan. Like, try me, bro. Spiritual warfare. I can feel dark energy around me. The more I'm watching these videos, the more and more and more I feel his presence. And yeah, it was like terrifying sometimes, but I kept thinking, I'm like, nope, no, this means I'm on to something really, really good if I'm feeling fearful right now. So that was it for me, was YouTube videos and going down the rabbit hole guided by God.
That's the best response to that question that I've ever gotten. I love this. For me, I heard the term New Age deception out of nowhere one day at church and in a friend's testimony on a baptism weekend. And I was like, New Age deception? Like, wait, what is this? She's talking about astrology and stuff. I'm into that. Am I like new? And I was just perplexed and I Googled New Age deception. And I'm like, all right, I need to order a book about this. So I'll share the book that I read was called The Second Coming of the New Age by Stephen Bankars. And Stephen Bankars is incredible too. If you look him up on YouTube, they break down every single practice that you get in the New Age world, yoga, astrology, meditation, manifestation, everything in there. They approach it from a theological and a philosophical, like just general reasoning and logic as well, of like how all of these things don't make sense as a substance for like basing your life and your approach to theology through these windows. And it just same thing, like everything like melted away and I was chucking crystals in the garbage and tearing things off my walls. I was like, oh my God, I have been dead wrong for 10 years. So thank you, YouTube and Stephen Bankars and people who Doreen Virtue helped me so much too. Her Angela Marie Scafaldi, she's incredible. I got a YouTube rabbit hole for you that's really good. You might appreciate this. I posted this the other day. There's a YouTuber called Truth in Christ, and he does like mathematical pattern analysis on the KJV Bible specifically. And there's a video that's
Oh,
called What the 1600th and 11th mention of Lord in the Bible signifies. Something like that. If you
wow.
search
That's the stuff.
1611, and you will not believe the layers of prophecy, the layers of signature, the layers of like mathematical things going on in specifically the King James Bible, which I hadn't been reading. I'd been reading the NIV, so it kind of got me interested in reading King James. But yeah, I'm right there with you.
Send
The
it
good
to me.
rabbit
I'm like,
hole.
give me a good rabbit hole. Like I nerd out on that stuff because it just helps my mind also. It's a good mind renewal of what I thought I knew is not what truth is. And here's a new way of looking at it. It never ends. Like,
Mhm.
it's always going to be unfolding.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'll send you the link after this. But thank you so much for taking the time to get on here and to share your story and to talk shop about how our businesses have changed and what your experience of that has been and just like the amazing ways that God has worked and turned on the faucet and upgraded so many things so quickly. And yeah, just a joy to get to have on the show and hear and get to know us the first time we get to really connect. So it's been a pleasure. And I will put links and stuff in the show notes, but quickly, if someone wants to check out your free community or Untamed or any of the other things that you have, where can they go to do that? Is there anything, other resources you want to share?
Yeah, She Leads is really like the place to be. That's we're just women who are curious about getting back to God or already like Jesus lovers. Like we're all you who you be is welcome sort of group. We have Sunday at 4 p.m. EST. Every Sunday, I host a Zoom call where I teach a message for 30 minutes. And so if you want to be on those, you can, for that, it's in school. So you can just DM me on Instagram, Taylor, at Taylor Simpson, and just DM me like she leads. And that'll like trigger a flow to come in there. And then, yeah, Untamed University is theuntameduniversity.com. And we have winter actually semester kicking off in January, which is super exciting. So you can just head to that link.
So good. Well, thanks again. And thanks for everyone who's listening, who's getting so much out of this, whether you're curious or skeptical or just all in, wherever you are. By the way, like, please, my inbox is open to any listener who's having revelations or having questions or anything. Like, I just love being a resource. That's what the intention of this platform is to be. And thank you for tuning in. And we'll see you on the next episode.